All right, folks, I wanted to give you just a short commentary, some input on what's going around. This has been around a few years now, but it came up recently. A proposal called the Regulation Freedom Amendment. Wow, what could be better than that idea, right? It almost sounds like the Balanced Budget Amendment. And, there's a reason for that, but I will get into that a little bit later. Now, the Regulation Freedom Amendment is an idea that to add an amendment to the United States Constitution, which says whenever, let me get my annotation out here. Okay. Whenever 1/4 of the members of the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate transmit to the President of the United States their written declaration of opposition to a proposed federal regulation, it shall require a majority vote of the House and Senate to adopt that regulation. Wow, that sounds amazing, right? It sounds similar to the REINS Act, which has been going through Congress for a number of years, saying, well, we need to at least approve major regulations. So what could possibly be wrong with that? And what are some red flags? Well, some of you are familiar with the proposed Balanced Budget Amendment. Now, this is a similar type of concept in its flaws. It sounds awesome to those who describe themselves as conservative, but the devil is in the detail. So let's think about this a little bit. Should regulations have the force of law? Now, if you're a constitutionalist, you would say no. They have not gone through the legislative process, and it's a legitimate practice for Congress to delegate their lawmaking authority to these departments and things, so they should not have the force of law, the administrative law, or whatever you want to call them. But that has been ignored. It says in Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1, right after the preamble that everybody memorizes in school or some used to, right? It says, all legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress, which shall consist of a House of Representatives and a Senate. Nowhere in there does it include the Bureau of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So right there, we know that these should not have the force of law, but they are treated as such, right? If you try to go against a federal regulation, you're going to be held criminally liable, and the effect is it has a force of law. It did not go through the legislative process, did not go through any committees, nothing like that. And worse than that is they have the ability to act as judge, jury, and executioner. They have both legislative, judicial, and executive power, all in the administrative state, as people call it. So to conservatives, that's kind of like music to their ears. Wow, we should get rid of that. We should roll that back. Maybe we should change the Constitution to right that wrong, right? Well, there's a problem with that, okay? First of all, anytime you want to change the Constitution, you need to understand what the amendment process was put in there for. I could cite many examples. One of them would be Madison and Federalist number 43, I believe it was, where he said that the purpose of amendments is to correct errors. So, and many other founding fathers understood this idea, that it's just common sense. If there's something wrong with the Constitution, change the Constitution. But if there's something wrong with somebody else that's misbehaving in the government, then the Constitution, changing the Constitution isn't going to solve that. If you're ignoring the Constitution, then changing the Constitution isn't going to solve that problem. That's just more words to be ignored. We see that with the courts nowadays, right? So let's take a look at this. What does that in effect do? Whenever 1/4 of the members of the U.S. House or Senate transmit to the President their written declaration of opposition to the proposed federal regulation, it shall be requiring a majority vote of the House and Senate to adopt that regulation. In other words, another way of saying that is, let's say there's a proposed regulation and you don't get 25%, let's say 25 U.S. senators to sign a written declaration that, hey, we should have a vote on this. If you don't get that, that regulation is considered as having the force of law. So only the things that come to there. And it's not only that, you not only need 25 senators, or I'm not sure how many, it's probably 117 or so representatives in the House to sign a written declaration, but it would have to pass a majority vote in both the House and the Senate. Now, really, what should happen is all of regulations, anything that has a force of law, should pass the House and the Senate if it's going to be held as a law over our heads as citizens, right? But since the progressive era, the states and the federal government have bought this idea that, you know what, it would be more efficient, it would be more wise and enlightened to just delegate legislative authority to these departments and things, and they can come up with these rules for managing our life rather than having it go through this clunky process of having hearings and then the public gets input and such. And that's just kind of old way of thinking, right? Well, now, we've had over 100 years of that way of thinking, and how are we doing with that? Well, we have a monumental amount of regulation over our heads, not because of the Constitution, but because of ignoring the Constitution. You can look at Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. That is something that says the Congress only has authority to legislate on these certain things. And outside of that, they don't have authority. That was the understanding at the time that the Constitution was ratified. And if that would not have been the understanding of the states when they ratified, they would never have ratified the Constitution in the first place. You can also look at the 10th Amendment, which says if we haven't delegated this authority to the federal government, it's reserved to the states or the people, respectively. All of those things say that really the Regulation Freedom Amendment is unnecessary if we faithfully understand and apply the true meaning of the U.S. Constitution. But of course, we're ignoring that. So how is an amendment going to solve that? Really, it's going to, this amendment would just make it so that the criteria for saying whether a regulation is constitutional depends on what Congress does, not what the constitutional limitations on power are. Once again, this would change our constitutional order fundamentally to saying that regulations are legitimate under the Constitution as laws binding upon you and me, based not on what the constitutional limitations are, but upon what Congress decides is worth discussing and is worth debating. Other than that, if Congress doesn't decide they're worth discussing or debating, we'll just assume that they're just fine. And they'll have constitutional protection. That's just certainly implied in there that without the congressional action, that it will just be considered constitutional. That's not what the Constitution principles were founded on, what our country was founded on. The idea of enumerated powers, you can only do what's specifically listed rather than what's specifically prohibited, is a fundamental principle of our national government. All right, so let's move into some some claims that they make in this website. This is the Regulation Freedom Amendment. Okay, you see right, let me move this a little bit so we can work on that. Okay, it has frequently asked questions. So if someone went to say, well, how are they going to achieve this amendment? All right, well, let's see. One of the questions asked here is this effort about holding an Article 5 convention? In other words, a constitutional convention, a convention of states, whatever people want to call it, right? Convention under the 5th article of the Constitution. It says, no, this is not about holding a convention, but about mobilizing states to persuade Congress to propose the amendment, just as states helped persuade Congress to propose the Bill of Rights. Both opponents of an Article 5 convention, like Virginia Senator Dick Black, and supporters like Virginia House GOP caucus chair, Tim Hugo, back this effort. All right, so, well, that sounds pretty reassuring. They're like, no, we don't want to have a con. We don't want to have a constitutional convention. We just want to convince Congress to do that. All right, well, that's their words. What about their other things that are going on here? How does that comport with that claim? Well, let's take a look at, go back to the home page. You scroll down a little bit and you see, join the Regulation Freedom Amendment effort. Together we can do this. And you see, click on plan. What is their plan to accomplish this? Well, number one, get resolutions by 34 states with the Regulation Freedom Amendment language. 34 states. Well, that's 2/3 of the states, isn't it? Have you ever heard of any place that requires 2/3 of the states to start the amendment process? Well, yes, I have. If you look at the 5th article of the U.S. Constitution, it provides for 2 ways for amending the U.S. Constitution. The first way is the one we've always done, which is through Congress proposing, and that takes 2/3 of the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the Senate to propose, and then it goes to the states for ratification, and you need 3/4, or in our current situation, 38 state legislatures to ratify it for it to become officially part of the U.S. Constitution. Now, the part that we have not utilized to this date is the second part. Or, well, actually, there we go. There's the first or. Or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. So, 2/3 of the states is 34 states. It's interesting they picked 34 states. Why not 33? Why not 40? Why not 30? Why not 26? Just a simple majority. Why 34? That seems a little odd, right? Unless there's something more going on here, right? So if we're going to have a Article 5 convention, a convention for proposing amendments, as it says in the U.S. Constitution, you need 34 state legislatures to pass resolutions asking Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution. That we've never done that before, but you need 34 states, not 38. All right. Well, let's go back here and see what else they're planning to do. Number 2, achieve one of the 3 following strategies. A 10th Amendment rule adopted in the U.S. House and a 10th Amendment pledge taken by 51 senators could empower the states to force Congress to propose Regulation Freedom Amendment as early as 2017. Oh, well, that sounds reassuring, doesn't it? I mean, now, isn't there a 10th Amendment rule somewhere in Congress? Oh, yes. It's called the 10th Amendment, right? You know, and every 2 years they take a solemn oath to uphold the Constitution, which the 10th Amendment is part of the U.S. Constitution, right? So I think there is a 10th Amendment rule. Now you can formalize that, but okay, how exactly do you enforce that? The only way you enforce that is we, the citizens, are the enforcer of the Constitution. We have to understand and demand adherence to it. So this is kind of meaningless in a way. I mean, it'd be nice if they had a 10th Amendment pledge, but the senators also take an oath to uphold the U.S. Constitution, and violating their oath that they ignore the 10th Amendment or the 5th Amendment or the 26th Amendment or whatever. All right. Now, and then B, faithful delegate laws enacted in a majority of states. Okay, so that'd be 26 states, I suppose. So what are they getting at here? What are faithful delegate laws? Well, let's take a look here. Now they said, right, in the frequently asked questions, hey, don't worry, this doesn't have anything to do with an Article 5 Constitutional Convention, right? Passed in 7 states. I wonder what that could be. Let's see. It says down here, here's the states that passed them, at least since the website was updated. It says, these faithful delegate laws give each state the power to replace and thus control potentially disobedient delegates if there ever was an Article 5 convention. Huh? Okay, let's read that again. These faithful delegate laws give each state the power to replace and thus control potentially disobedient delegates if there ever was an Article 5 convention. Okay, so now we're starting to see what their game plan is. They're not real forthcoming with it, though. Their game plan is, let's try and get 34 state legislatures to ask Congress to propose the amendment. And when they don't, which I think they're hedging their bet, they will not, but it could happen. It could happen that with enough pressure that the Congress proposes the amendment, but you need 290 House members, 67 senators to approve, and then send it to the states. Now, I'm willing to guess that if that were to ever take place, you would need a major movement to get that happening, which, of course, is the point of Article 5 and the two-thirds requirement of the House and the Senate. And it shouldn't be something that just is a simple majority, right? It shouldn't be too hard, but it shouldn't be too easy, that's for sure. That's why we've only had 27 amendments. All right, so if the point is to not have an Article 5 convention, they seem to be really hedging their bets that they're going to have to go back and say, see, Congress refused to propose this amendment, therefore we are going to push for an Article 5 convention. This sounds a lot like what happened with the term limits people, doesn't it? Right? I could get into that another time, but they're pushing for an Article 5 convention. One more clue as to what they're trying to do. Now, you might not believe me. You think, that's just speculation, Eldon. I mean, you're just really scared of this Article 5 convention thing. Okay, if that doesn't convince you enough, let's take a look at their news/blog. And I found this interesting here. All right. It has a headline. Resolve. Let's see. RNC, Republican National Committee, with White House blessing, unanimously endorses or re-endorses the Regulation Freedom Amendment. Oh, well, I guess they're going to tout that. Now here's their amendment. And right at the bottom, let's see here. See, maybe I went past it there. Oh, there we go. Roman Buehler, director, and Tommy Collins, national chairwoman. Now, some of you might remember, if you live in some of these places, Roman Buehler. Let me refresh your memory if you live in South Dakota. So here is a headline from 2013. Let's bring that up here, Rapid City Journal. And it says, House defeats, so South Dakota House of Representatives, defeats call for balanced budget amendment. Here's a picture. All right, look closely there. The caption, it says, unregistered lobbyist Roman Buehler left excuse me. Okay. All right. Unregistered lobbyist Roman Buehler confers with Representative Manny Stahl from Sioux Falls on Wednesday afternoon outside the House. Buehler of Meehan, Virginia, spent the past several days working to build support for a package of bills that would have South Dakota support a federal constitutional convention to require a balanced budget amendment. Huh, interesting there. That's a coincidence. Roman Buehler just happened to be with this group pushing for a constitutional convention under Article 5 and for a balanced budget amendment. And, you know, they didn't really say that in the caption, but I do recall that part of their package was a Delegate Limitation Act, which actually passed, and that application for a convention passed. And don't buy it. This is not something that should be gone into without really looking closely before you leap. If you don't want a constitutional convention, then of course don't go for this this idea of this Regulation Freedom Amendment. If you do want a constitutional convention, then why are these people saying that they don't want a constitutional convention when they obviously are hedging their bets that they will need to switch into the mode of pushing for one? Real cynical. Not good people to associate with, I would think. So that's my thoughts. Hope you enjoyed the analysis, and I'll take care. Okay, bye.